Peace Corps, Sargent Shriver said that youthful enthusiasm and noble purposes weren't going to be enough. They had to be combined with a hard-headed pragmatism and a realistic administration. And in the early days of the Peace Corps, he said, we're looking for the formula for practical idealism. This is one of those phrases that our program has kind of taken on as just something you don't really nail down, but it kind of stands out there as something that pulls you towards this ideal of combining a sense of commitment to hope, but also with kind of skills and savvy to try to accomplish what you set out for. So this was a formula that Shriver himself explored throughout a really storied career. He just turned 95 last week, I believe. November 9th is Sargent's birthday. He just turned 95. He explored what practical idealism might look like, not only with Peace Corps, but earlier in his involvement with the Civil Rights Movement, and then after in his work with the War on Poverty program. Many of those programs still continue to exist. In his later work on interreligious dialogue, and when he came a little later to the family program Special Olympics and really expanded it globally. In fact, the first time I met Sarge, he was just back from a trip to China. This would have been in '99 or 2000, I think. He literally just arrived back from China, and in the course of that single visit, China began to change its policies around people with developmental disabilities, and as you might know, they then hosted the International Special Olympics in Beijing just a couple of years ago. So it's gone from, talk about a radical kind of change, so it's the largest Special Olympics program in the world now. I guess there are advantages to very top-down political administration. If you charm the right person, change happens quickly. So this evening we want to take just a little bit of time from busy schedules and really appreciate people coming out to first offer a couple of special presentations to celebrate really our program's attempt to continue the spirit of practical idealism. And then we've got some really great panelist guests with us this evening that are really doing great work across the city in different sectors around different issues, and we really want to just we're going to invite them to say a little bit about the work they're doing and hopefully engage in a really interactive discussion about this idea of making a difference in Baltimore, social change leadership. So to begin the evening, I want to recognize one of our longstanding partners, community partners of our program, and I want to introduce Jennifer Robinson to make that intro.
So when the Peace Worker Program looks for community partners, we first look for a mission fit. We need to partner with organizations and people who are as passionate about our community as we are. We look for leadership in those programs and the fact that they can support and mentor a fellow while respecting their drive and nurturing reflection. While our service placements range from direct service to policy placements, they always represent the full spectrum of opportunities that can make service a life's work. The Office of Baltimore City Councilman Jim Kraft has been a model community partner since we began working with him more than 5 years ago. We knew right away that Jim could feel at home wearing the Peace Worker label. He is a true Baltimorean and considers himself an activist as much as a politician. Our partnership has grown into a real opportunity for policy students to practice what they're learning and to be of service to Baltimore City residents. Their experience at the office focuses on the needs of community members, and they, like all of Jim's staff, take great pride in providing individual customer service to the residents in the district. They have the opportunity to experience the best of city life along with its most challenging issues. Jim and his staff have provided opportunities for peace workers to lead efforts that interested them, as Jen Pierkowski did when she helped author his Green Plan. She took her experience in Jim's office with her to Capitol Hill, where she now works for Senator Merkley of Oregon. So Jen shared these thoughts when I told her we were going to be honoring Jim tonight. She said, "Councilman Kraft exemplifies what the Shriver Peace Worker Program is about. He's a dedicated public service committed to making a difference in people's lives, one block at a time. He's not afraid to roll up his sleeves and fight for the needs of the First District, the citizens of Baltimore, and the environmental health of our planet. Jim has been a personal mentor, friend, and teacher. He has a tremendous ability to inspire those around him, and simply put, I couldn't have asked for a better boss. His office has trained other talent that we're happy to have here in Baltimore. Kaylin McGuff, who was a peace worker in Jim's office until last May, is now a special assistant to City Council President Jack Young. And we can't wait to see where Kristen Oldendorf, who's just started her placement with Jim's office, will go when she's finished with her 2 years. So the Peace Worker Program looks forward to many more years of partnership with Jim's office, and it's our honor to recognize him and his staff tonight. You want to come on up, Jim? So our recognition says the Shriver Center proudly recognizes 5 years of outstanding community partnership with the Office of Baltimore City Councilman Jim Kraft, presented on November 16, 2010, and we have a Sargent Shriver quote. All of us must find ways to work together. We must view our world and our interconnectedness dramatically, profoundly, and courageously.
Thank you all. If I had known that I was going to get one of these fancy things, I would have started this a lot earlier. If I could just take a couple minutes of your time. I know a lot of Peace Corps workers as I was growing up. I'm old enough to be there when this all started. You know, I was laughing the other day that it was the 50th anniversary. November 8th was the 50th anniversary of the election of John F. Kennedy. And people always say, how'd you get your start in politics? And I said, I got my start in politics when I was a kid and I worked for the Democratic bosses in Northeast Baltimore. And whenever something with Richard Nixon's name went up, we tore it down. So we're not supposed to tell that story, but anyhow, those were politics in the late 1950s, 1960s. But I want to thank, because I ran for office in 2003. And my campaign manager was Billy Wong, who was a Peace Corps worker. Billy went on to become my chief of staff and served as my chief of staff, and then until he went to law school, and now he works for the Maryland Department of Transportation and did a really good job. And then I had referred to me by a Peace Corps worker, Aaron Fiaschetti, who has been my chief of staff since Billy left. And so Aaron wouldn't be with me without having come in through Peace Corps workers. And then I had Jen Pierkowski, and I got a text from Jen saying that she was going to be here, but Jen set the mold for our Peace Corps workers. I mean, she is just, I can't say enough good things about Jen, and she went down to Washington, and I really tried to keep her, but you know, those feds, they have a lot of money. And when you're a poor little city like Baltimore, we really can't compete with those salaries. And anyway, she's doing a great job in there. But I have to say, and this is true of all my folks, Jen and Kaylin's here somewhere, and there's Kaylin in the back, there's Kristen right there. The great thing about the Peace Corps workers is that they come into your office, you sit down with them, you interview them, and you say, you know, this is what we do here, you know, how can you help? And that's the end of it. It's like, you know, they say, okay, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. We say, we want you to do this, and they're off. I mean, right now, we have this, I mean, Kristen has been with me 3 months, 3.5 months. We have going in Southeast Baltimore right now, the only place in the whole city, we have our own recycling contest going on in our 12 schools down there. Now, some of these schools weren't even recycling before, okay, but Kristen has put this whole thing together, working with the Department of Public Works, the Mayor's Greener folks, and this will then, when we finish this at the end of this year, this will become a model in our conversations with Dr. Alonso for doing this in other schools around there. And, you know, we had this conversation, talked to Kristen, and she has put the whole program together. Jen Pierkowski wrote my green plan. We sat down, we worked, I mean, Jen wrote it. Kaylin, there wasn't a neighborhood. President of the City Council stole her from me. Besides doing this stuff that you know, these special projects. Every person who works in my office gets assigned certain communities. So they not only work during the day, but they're out in the neighborhoods in the evenings, working with the folks in the neighborhoods. And the great thing about my Peace Corps workers is this: I never have to worry about them when they're out there. I mean, they are great representatives of the city. You know, some people you get to work for, you know, I'm going to wrap this up because I know you got to do it, but you know, when you get somebody to work for, you're always worried, like, is that person going to go and embarrass me? Are they going to like, say something that's going to really make me look like more of a jerk than I am? You know, you always have that in the back of your mind. But I always know that when I send one of the Peace Corps folks out, I don't need to do that. And I also know this, that it doesn't matter what comes up, they can handle it. So I'm looking forward to more. I could use another one right now. We always can use more help. So if any of you go out there looking for a job, come see us. But thank you all so much. I really, really treasure this. I can't tell you, I really can't tell you how much it means to me to get this, particularly coming from Sargent. Thanks.
Jeff, you can hang around a little bit. We're just going to, we'll invite you to be an active audience member and
We'll be around for a while.
Interact with the panel. So just one other recognition we want to give. We started a couple of years ago recognizing an alum of our program. We thought of as this Practical Idealist Award. And so tonight we just want to present our third, what will be an annual Practical Idealist Award. You know, I'm proud to work in this Shriver tradition of service and peace work and somehow contribute to that legacy. And our program mission is to engage returning Peace Corps volunteers as they come home from abroad, engage them in study and service and reflection, bring them together in an ongoing conversation about ethics and social change and leadership, and develop a community among that group. In short, this is our goal, to try to instill programmatically this sense of practical idealism as a deeper kind of core value for life and careers moving on, whether you stay locally or go abroad, but many are staying locally. But we're biased, of course, but we think that a mission like that attracts a great group of people, and it's very hard to single anyone out. But we do that really recognizing kind of the program as a whole, but also as a way to feature one of our alums. So I want to introduce Rich Kimball. I'll have him come up in a second. He's standing in the wings there. So Rich Kimball served in Peace Corps in Moldova. He taught English to speakers of other languages. He was an ESOL teacher and community development volunteer. I actually heard one of the, when Peace Corps came up with that community development volunteer title, they intended it to be vague. They just thought, we'll just put him in there with that description and then just see what happened. It was kind of a cruel experiment that they're still doing. Ashley might speak to that later. So when Rich returned, he came to Baltimore and he completed a bachelor's degree in nursing at the Fellows Program at Johns Hopkins and master's degrees in nursing and public health, both from Johns Hopkins University. And then he remained at Johns Hopkins as an instructor in the School of Nursing and a staff member at the Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis Clinic, ALS, Lou Gehrig's Disease Clinic at Hopkins. As a fellow with us, Rich added another kind of structural policy level dimension to his work in this health field by starting his PhD in health policy in his doctoral dissertation, which he just defended a few months ago. He's formerly Dr. Richard Kimball now. Started research on the important issue of caregiver burden and quality of life issues associated with long-term degenerative diseases like ALS. So he's really focused his work and health policy around these tremendously complicated and vulnerable populations. And during his time as a peace worker, Rich served with Baltimore Homeless Services, and he assisted the office's transition to the health department at that time, and he redesigned and led the Baltimore Homeless Census, changing it from a kind of a perfunctory HUD survey to something that collected a much more robust data to try to understand what the issues and experiences of homelessness in Baltimore were. So anybody that knows Rich knows that his engagement in health services runs both broad and deep. His professional life bridges teaching, research, and direct service providing, and focuses really on providing quality and equal care to underserved populations. So he's moving right along towards this goal of a city where equitable health care is a reality for vulnerable populations. We're going to have the good fortune to keep Rich around. I think he just signed with Johns Hopkins his tenure track positions with dual appointment to the School of Medicine and School of Nursing. So he's going to be able to continue his work here. Rich, you're an educator and an agitator in that Frederick Douglass sense of agitating for social change. And it's a real pleasure to award you this third Practical Idealist Award. What's going to change the world today is the same thing that's changed it in the past, an idea and the dedicated service of individuals committed to that idea. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you for that fabulous introduction. Actually, you know, I have to say, it's nice to be back. I defended in late May and graduated and didn't think I'd have much room to come back here to UMBC, so it's nice actually to be back here for this award and this honor, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Peace Corps, for giving me the opportunity to learn and kind of bring me full swing back to my PhD program, kind of the love of what I wanted to do in terms of health policy, and finishing up the doctorate this May. I just want to give a round of applause, please, to Jody and Jennifer for putting this together. And I don't just mean this program, I mean keeping the Shriver dream alive and the Peace Worker program alive, as anything is, you know, these days with the economic times. It's tough, down to, I think, 12 Peace Workers currently. I mean, we like to have 15 to 16, correct? So get your checkbooks out, and I'll throw that in. I'm not below that at all. I'd just like to say that, again, I don't know, I think in some regards it has been quite a journey. My own service began with Peace Corps, I feel, and kind of reflecting back over the years, service in Moldova. Jennifer and I actually overlapped there a year. And that community development volunteer kind of role was very interesting because it really was true. I mean, the first year I was very much into the teaching of English, but the second year was really when, and I think most volunteers can remember this, that it was just really coasting and really learning so much. And I really feel to this day that there's nothing I could give back to Moldova, and I was just there actually in August. I learned so much about myself, about life, about everything. There's no way that I could possibly give enough back through any kind of service. But also on the same regard, and thinking about later in life, I have to say that the Shriver Peace Worker program really has opened up a lot of doors for me, starting with kind of the Baltimore Homeless Services, as Jody mentioned, in 2005, and doing the census was just an incredible, very eye-opening experience for me, putting together the volunteers on a nice snowy day at the end of January and going out canvassing Baltimore City and looking for the homeless and trying to find them in every nook and cranny where they were, to justify the existence of more funding for managing a problem that should have been solved a long time ago in the United States of America.
Absolutely.
And I guess I just want to say, certainly there are always struggles. Everyone has struggles and issues. You can fall in despair and wonder what's going on and what the next steps are. But I hope that people will remember that service to in whatever shape or form can make a difference. That great Margaret Mead quote that's in the Shriver Center right in front is fantastic to always remember, that a small group of committed citizens can make a difference. And I'd just like to share a little bit of just a short story. A psychologist that I was, I'm in counseling now. Post-traumatic PhD program. We were just getting the very first session, getting to know one another, and kind of going through how I came about being a professor, et cetera, and teaching, and started in Moldova, et cetera, and Peace Corps. And he actually stopped me in the middle of the session and said, "Why, thank you for your service. I really appreciate that." And I thought he was a little loopy there, a little crazy for saying that. But the more I reflect upon it, the more I appreciate it. And I greatly, I just like to thank you very much for this honor, for doing that. It's nice to be recognized for your service. It's not why I do service, but it is certainly a reason that it is something that inspires me, certainly to do more. And I hope that this will help me do more dedicated service throughout the years, whether that be through teaching, through research, but always, focusing back on the vulnerable populations and whatever those might be, whether it be the people who are homeless or experiencing homelessness every night in Baltimore City, whether that be vulnerable populations like caregivers and ALS patients of neurodegenerative and other diseases, or whether that be you and me when we fall in hard times ourselves. And I guess I just like to end with a quote by Gandhi, who said, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." And I'd just like to thank you once again. Appreciate it.
I'm going to invite you to stay up. Rich will stay up, and I'm going to quickly introduce some of our distinguished panelists here, and we'll kind of move right into some discussion. And so we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So I think with the crowd that we've got, I'm wondering if we turn chairs, if we can be seen. Can we just talk? Do you think we can speak loud enough to be heard?
Stand up for us to stand there so everyone.
Yeah, do you think that's okay? So let me invite our panelists to come up. We'll do quick intros. And yeah, is that okay? Yeah.
I spoke for myself, I'm sorry.
And I will say that if anybody's standing in the back and gets worried, there are a few front row seats. So come up and fill those. Huh? Jody, let me invite you over here to the center. Ashley, there you are. Okay. So we huh? No, I'm asking. Inviting you right on over. No. Okay, so let me just do quick introductions, and then we've got a special guest that I want to invite to propose kind of a first question. We picked this topic of social change leadership with the idea of hopefully provoking just some discussion about the region that we live in and what kind of issues and strategies we can use for all of us to engage and kind of make a difference. And we really have a diverse representation here. Just Ashley Milburn is here, a artist, and really works with issues that intersect art, service, organizing, social change. She's done tremendous work on the west side of Baltimore, thinking about spaces, rethinking spaces that have fallen into either disuse or and that have wounds from previous eras in the city, and how to bring people together around rethinking those spaces. So Ashley, it's just great to have you here to represent that. And Jody Olsen is here. Jody, I think this is not an exaggeration to say, is probably one of the most beloved and known people in the history of the Peace Corps, in our Peace Corps community. Yeah. She's been at every level. Nobody knows the Peace Corps better than Jody, and served as a volunteer herself and then staff at every level, up to many years as deputy director and then a stint as the interim director. But we've also a longtime Baltimore resident for many years, and then we have the honor of having her back in the city now at the School of Social Work. So Jody's working with social work students, thinking about places both international social work, but here in Baltimore. So Jody, great to have you. Rich, you know. Ed Orser, professor of American Studies, but just recently, I'm still crying, Ed, that Ed has just retired very recently from American Studies Department here at UMBC. But we're not letting him go anywhere, so this is a reminder, Ed. You haven't even been to your retirement party just less than a week ago, and we're pulling you out back onto campus. Ed really was one of the founding members of the American Studies Department here, but really is always, for decades now, has gotten students out of the classroom and into communities, powerfully working with neighborhoods and communities to understand really what the culture of that community is and what the issues, and it's resulted in powerful research, including really the seminal work on blockbusting, certainly in Baltimore, but also that kind of phenomenon in many other American cities. And then most recently, Ed has really done a lot of work around the green space in the city on the west side, the revival of Lincoln Park and Wind Falls Park. So Ed, it's a real treat to have you here. And Sally Scott from the Association of Baltimore Area Grantmakers and the Baltimore Neighborhood Collaborative. And we're just meeting each other, but I'm so glad you've come out, and I just know from kind of preparing for the event that the perspectives you bring not only from the funding community and thinking about how resources can kind of make it to the right spot to target key issues, and specifically issues around housing and keeping people in housing now, right, with foreclosure crisis and how to come back from crises like that. So Sally, it's really a pleasure to have you here too. So we've got a real mix across housing, open space issues, health services. Really, I think any questions we've got, we're going to have a way to kind of mix this up. And one last introduction I want to make that'll launch us. Calliope Partemos is with us, Deputy Mayor for Neighborhoods and Economic Development. I probably said that backwards. Okay. An illustrious alumna of UMBC. It's really great to have you back on campus. And Deputy Mayor of Baltimore City. So if I could, I'd love to invite you just from either where you are or come on up where we can see and launch kind of a first question, and we'll just take it from there. We're going to just, this is openly as we can.
Are they just standing there?
I think if we sit, we'll lose them, right?
It's a great crowd. Hello, everyone. I am a little surprised by today. I was asked to return to campus. I had a meeting with President Hrabowski, and he actually was the president the year I graduated, so I'm telling my age since he's been here for a while. It's great to be back on campus. There's a lot of changes, so it's very great. How many Baltimore City high school graduates do we have here? Anyone from Baltimore City? Anyone? Just a couple? Yeah, Councilman, we have a couple. So it's great to be here, and it's great to be back on campus, and it's great to be part of this program, so I wanted to thank you. And I am the Deputy Mayor of Economic and Neighborhood Development in Baltimore City. I have so many questions for the panel. When I walked in, I feel like an imposter. Everyone said to me, "Oh, I didn't know that you were a Peace Corps volunteer." And I was like, "I'm not, I'm just a graduate." So, but I have the Peace Corps in my heart and the work that you all do, so I do appreciate your work. And I have so many questions for you, but I'm gonna allow the students to ask most of them. From a purely, I guess, selfish interest on behalf of Baltimore City. And we currently have a Bloomberg grant that we had received, and we hired a Chief Services Officer. So we have a returning Peace Corps volunteer, Vu Dang, who was going to be here today but couldn't attend. And he is working on recruiting people to come back into the city and work with our agencies and working on a whole volunteer effort for Baltimore City. And it's a 2-year study, and he's working on that. So my question to you in terms of attempting to hire the best and the brightest and people who are interested in working for the city, understanding its financial constraints and limitations and what that means, but also people who do understand the importance of working for city government and what that means and on what level that can affect social change. And I wanted to know if you had any suggestions on what the city can do better in order to attract those quality people to come and work for the city. Anything? That wasn't softball, right? But I was just wondering, any thoughts that you have on what we can do to retain and recruit? And
I have one idea. The return volunteers are going to laugh at this one. But if the city government builds in the 2 years of Peace Corps service in the retirement program for Baltimore City workers, you will get a lot of return Peace Corps volunteers coming to work for the city.
Wow. Okay. Good grandfather, all of the city. Anybody else? How are we gonna? Yeah,
That's a long term.
I like the out of the box thing. I've worked in that level before, and for me it was a disconnect in a lot of ways. A lot of policy-driven kinds of pushing for and against communities. But my saving grace, I guess, was to try to find something really great and fun to do that was both helpful, useful, and relevant. And they tend to be the most engaging things to keep the attention of the city, keep it connected to people and purpose. I think if I would suggest you find some really great fun things to do that are really relevant and helpful.
I think related to Ashley's point is I think people are motivated by a sense of vision, forward motion, purpose, and and I think the mayor has this tremendous opportunity as she's running to be elected to articulate that, because I get to spend some amount of time with people in their 20s and 30s working in community development, and I'm really impressed with their sense of connection to mission and idealism. So if to the extent the mayor and the department heads can articulate that, I think you'll pull people in.
Can I drive it home?
Sure.
Plan this.
The only way I know you can do that is to invite people at a table like these, to really find art makers and musicians and scientists and put them at the task of understanding how a city moves. That's your creative resource. And it's an untapped one and unused one.
We're going to continue this discussion with you all privately.
Oh.
I want to go back to an old example that backs up your point, Ashley. That when I was setting up the Area Agency on Aging for Baltimore City, I wasn't a Baltimore City employee, but the offices were in the Waxler Center for Aging. And so for me as a Baltimore City employee to go to work in a very bureaucratic job, I spent my time in the Waxler Center, which means I could take Spanish classes, I could dance, I could help deliver lunches. And coming back to the creative part, I felt so connected with older citizens of Baltimore City every single day that I went to work. And it really helped me invest in what I was doing as a Baltimore City worker.
In the Shriver Peace Worker program, just working for Baltimore Homeless Services, I have to say, at first they didn't really know what my role was going to be, and then a new director came in and she grabbed me as special assistant, and then I got to do all kinds of things. So I think that helps. Being heard, I think, is really what that comes down to. And I think one of the ways to do that, like through the service learning, was a component of our education was meeting week to week in this prac with colleagues and talking about what you were doing and how you were doing it. I think that's extremely important. If there's some way to do that, in academia we would have a journal club, or we would talk about something else, but finding some way to do that.
And if there's any way you can replicate this Peace Worker program, because it's remarkable to me the way in which Peace Corps volunteers come to the Peace Worker program, most of them not from Baltimore, and Joby and Jennifer and others over the years have just done a wonderful job of instantly having them connect with the city in very meaningful ways. And Joby loves to call some of his tours untours, to really understand not just the tourist Baltimore, but in the way the real Baltimore. And part of the proof of that doing is the number of peace workers who've remained and who remain committed. So there's obviously something very special happening in this program that does that.
Thanks for the plug. I didn't pay any. Thanks so much. That's great. In the spirit of interaction, let me just say we have a lot of young people here. So let me just pose this quickly. What would it? Anybody got a thought about what it would take to keep you engaged in the city, keep you thinking about post-graduation, digging in and being here?
Can I put that another way?
Yeah.
This is a room full of resource, an unusual resource. What are you going to do with it?
Much better way. Yeah.
What do you do with it? That's the question. That's the underlining thing about service. It's not the project. It's the skill and the energy that you have that's needed across the board. If I suggest anything, it's figure out how you can do this together. You don't need us to tell you how to do that. You just need to focus on something.
Let me ask just a kind of the most introductory question, and we'll take it from there. So If I could just ask you to describe kind of your own vision of kind of the change work that you see yourself involved in, right? So what, it could be a particular issue, but where's your vision of where you want that to go, right? What's your own vision of social change for the work that you're doing here in Baltimore? Yeah? Jody, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start.
Out of the gate.
You're right, and I know a couple of students here who will understand exactly what this part of my comment is going to be about. I'm co-teaching a class on international social work, and we just focused yesterday's class on transnational immigration, migration, and what that is in relationship with Baltimore and with Maryland. And we asked the students yesterday to write about their work as social work interns now and their future work as social workers in relation to these populations and the culture and the international of the nationalization that they're about, but here in Baltimore, and who they, as social workers, what they can be with a broader cultural, international understanding and perspective. And I was almost in tears as I was reading the responses this morning, because it comes right to the point that you're making, that I feel if I have anything to help offer now is working with social work students who are in internships throughout Baltimore City, Baltimore County, some in Montgomery County, but that's not. But here in the Baltimore area, and to help infuse that broad perspective that you then bring it home to the neighborhood, to help an immigrant parent, to help with issues of deportation, counter deportation, to work within the community setting to make sure the resources are there, but always with a cultural hat on and an understanding of who they are when they're not in your office in that community setting. And that is what I really would like to help infuse, is the cultural perspective on social service delivery services in Baltimore City.
My project in West Baltimore went from a really crazy thing like to develop the world's largest mural in the highway to nowhere. It's 3 miles long. It's twice the size of LA Wall. LA Wall was a generation art project employed over 800 people. So we're talking about a project that would employ, young people to learn muraling for 20 years. And look what that would do to the art world. So I descended into West Baltimore with that in mind, coming out of like, so getting into community, when I learned how to listen to community and its voice and what they needed, it turned into a project that was cultural organizing, using art and culture to transform communities, to work with everything that we need to work with, from why my kid's sick to I can't find a job, I have to sell drugs, what do I do? One of the things we learned was, and it was a funny thing too, in a way, you could throw a rock in West Baltimore and hit 2 artists who were selling drugs, who were beating up people, who were sitting on the curb, who couldn't, was trying to, raise a kid, but they were art makers. So what do you do with that? So taking that information, trying to use art and culture as an organizing tool, and realizing that that community was invested with creativity from every corner, and it lacked all the resources for that to happen. We started to look at it in terms of, we're talking about using culture and art to build resilient communities. And what that gets to is the soul of man, humanity. And it also, we stop focusing on the deficit and work at the asset. That creates a different kind of mind and a different kind of elegant solution to things. So then it became a spiritual journey. Then it became a holistic kind of journey. So to answer your question, what have I done? I have no clue, except the idea of community is a living body. West Baltimore is a sick body. Even looking at the board, there are only maybe 2 dots of people working with that sick body. So that creates all kinds of questions for me about focus and what we're doing. And I don't know if that's answering your question.
Well, my question's not important. You're exactly right.
Can anybody help me here?
How do you see resources in this, right? People and
People are their own resource.
yeah.
We go into communities thinking we have resources, we have money, we have skills, we have all of this. But we tend to forget that the community itself is the biggest resource that we could ever have. We are still unfunded. There was a period where I was doing this, without a salary for a year. But it grows. The community, the humanity in community, the creative soul is the thing that people are starting to feed on and nurture. So what I guess the bottom line is, eventually that becomes a movement. It's a movement that doesn't need us. So whatever that means as an answer, that's where I go.
Yes,
It's great to kind of piece these together because hearing about the social workers and the kind of artists, and I think because we all find the area that we gravitate toward, and I think where I've gravitated toward over time are the kind of the scrappy organizations that work either at the neighborhood level, the multiple neighborhoods or citywide, the nonprofit groups that make a tremendous amount happen with relatively little resources. And it's hard sometimes to kind of inspire the same passion that when you're talking about individuals, people can understand it in some ways more easily, like I help this individual, than when you're talking about organizations. But I've really found over time that it's these groups which, come together through a sense of passion, through a sense of mission, that can sustain, as individuals come and go, funders come and go, they're the ones who can sustain a sense of forward motion for these parts of Baltimore, which in many cases I think otherwise would be forgotten or left behind. So at the Baltimore Neighborhood Collaborative, we work hard. While we're funders, we're also a nonprofit. We work very hard to raise money, local foundations, national foundations, really wherever we can find it, and then put that money out into the community to these organizations. And I've also been involved with a group some of you may be interested in called the Maryland Asset Building Community Development Network, statewide network of nonprofits as well as local agencies working for these same goals, but in some cases rural areas or small towns. So these are groups that I know many of you plug into through your internships, and where I think it takes a certain amount of tenaciousness and as well as resources to sustain them.
Maybe I could just chime in. Some of you may remember the Randy Newman song, "Oh Baltimore, it's hard just to live." And it's hard just to love, too. Baltimore's a hard city to love, I think. But at the same time, it's a city that is in so much need of love and so much need of understanding. My own role has been sort of peripheral, but I think it's really important to sort of understand the stories of Baltimore that have been lost, that have been neglected communities. And I mean the Baltimore area. I'll just give you an example. On the edge of campus is a historic African-American community that's been later surrounded by Greater Arbutus that really is in the process of almost disappearing. Adrian Jones, the Speaker of the House of Delegates, is from that neighborhood originally. But that's a neighborhood that reached out to us and said, we really need help in people understanding our community and helping us research and document. And one of our students did a wonderful job of tracing through documentary evidence the history of that community to establish that it has been a free black community since at least 1840. And that was very empowering for that community. It's sort of part of the local legend, but for them to discover that. I think there are many stories like that around the city, neighborhoods that have lost kind of a sense of who they are, lost a sense of their past, don't feel valued. So my own involvement has been more in terms of study, in terms of trying to help people understand, help myself to understand very complicated stories. And I did the work on block busting because I heard so many stories on both sides of that whole experience. I discovered, and many of you probably have the same experience, that you sort of face an issue like that of housing discrimination and racial change that is hard to get your mind around. And so you kind of drop a pebble in the pond and the ripples go out. And I don't begin to still understand that story. But you know, it's an important story we've got to know. So I really think that can be very empowering too.
That's just a good point. I used the example of this teaching nursing students in public health. I was at Beans and Bread in East Baltimore, that great east-west divide in Baltimore, just south of campus of Hopkins. And Beans and Bread is on Bank and Bond, and the next street down, the next alleyway down, is actually where the row of Frederick Douglass homes, the original building, exists. And that
Down the street.
And Beans and Bread serves predominantly transitional group of men, single men that live upstairs, and they're working, etc., not disabled. And they're trying to expand services in the community. And
That's Rich's 2-year-old. His biggest fan.
And it's interesting because those same homes, people live in them now, are actually against the expansion of this, kind of homeless services. And this was, and Jody actually came down and kind of one of these, things where you're trying to cross-pollinate areas and trying to bring awareness to my students of what's going on in East Baltimore. Jody came down and did a little talk on Frederick Douglass in the area of East Baltimore, what was happening at the time. Little did they know that right behind them, the same community that's against the expansion of the services was actually originally built by, or funded predominantly by Frederick Douglass. So
Yeah,
just,
that's great.
that kind of thing is interesting. Bringing the awareness to the students and seeing what they can do with it.
Yeah. Ashley, what?
Can we get more interactive?
You bet. Yeah. What do you want to talk about? Yeah.
Well, I think the title, I actually was just walking in the study and I saw the title Pragmatic Idealists, or something that I'm wrong.
Hold you right in, yeah.
Trying to be as practical as I can, and also I am an idealist. Are we kidding ourselves to think that capitalism is built for social work? I mean, we are cut out in every sector. You're talking resources. I actually was just introduced through a video, Zeitgeist Addendum, to the Venus Project, which has taught me that the dollar is a secondary resource, which creates scarcity. Are we kidding ourselves to say that we don't have enough resources, like you and I and all the people in this room, to feed, clothe, and shelter everyone in the world? And are we kidding ourselves to keep perpetuating now I know you have to play the game to get the change. However, thinking into the future, this sort of slow movement, sort of strangulation, let's try to get as much resource or monetary value into the city and into these places which need them. They don't need money, they need resources. Do you know of any groups that are besides Zeitgeist movement that are perhaps radical is a radical word, but forward thinking, not so scared to lose their job, really in there to fight for what they believe in. Do you know of any groups locally that are trying to maybe not play by the rules? Because practically, I don't know if it's just from my reading of Karl Marx, but you can see it all around. It's being siphoned labor all across the world is getting exploited. Workers, now slavery is not in the U.S., but it's across, and we're fine with that. We're fine with the child sweatshops, gasoline. Like, we're living a complete. It's almost laughable how idiotic we. I don't know what my question is. I'm trying to. I'm trying to just.
You've done good. You've done good. That's great. Jump in.
I got it.
Yeah.
It's a question I think all of us ask.
Yeah.
For me, it was two choices. Either you spend or waste your life fighting against pushing a mountain. You can't change capitalism. You can't change institutions. You can't move a building with, I don't know how many people you can do. You can waste your life and your resources trying to do that. What I've learned through my experience is that we spend no time at all thinking about what we can do, not what they are doing. We push back. We use our energy to try to change that thing, and you can't. I've been in Baltimore, I don't know, 8 years. Nothing has changed in West Baltimore. No matter what happens, the only thing I can count on is that the government will come move things around. It will let things fall down. So the question for me as a culture worker and the question for the community is, do you waste your energy pushing against something you cannot change? Or do you resource yourself? And if you resource yourself, that thing doesn't become a problem anymore. You grow stronger. And eventually, if I understand the question, eventually you become stronger than that thing that you've been wasting your life pushing against.
Jump in, Sal.
Yeah, I've spent about a lot of time since 2005 working on foreclosure prevention. And you can see in there dramatic excesses of capitalism, mistakes, and outright fraud, mistreatment of people. So what I see, agreeing with Ashley, I don't think we destroyed that system because I actually don't think we have another system to replace it with, though I maybe thought differently 25 years ago. But I do think regulation, not a sexy word, but good regulation is critical. And that's what I hope we are seeing at the federal level. And kind of dramatically maybe underestimated the importance of the financial regulation package, but at the state level, there's been some great work done in Maryland by this current administration to define mortgage fraud, to make it harder to foreclose on people without cause. So, to the extent people are interested in policy work and working at the state and federal levels, there's a huge amount you can do to trim the excesses, I think, of capitalism, which has been amply demonstrated recently.
I just like to say capitalism is a theory, it takes people, right? It's individuals communicating with one another that implements it. So when it gets down to it, right, it's us in the marketplace or whatever else. I think there are many other examples of capitalism in the world that have done a much better job than the United States. I mean, look at healthcare. In healthcare reform, it's a debacle. Put it mildly.
I don't know if you heard the introduction. We are in the City Hall. We're in the grant makers. We are in very specific governmental influential places. That's radical change. And from within that system, we can change that if we are intentional enough. So there is hope. It just depends on where you're gonna play with.
When I think about just the concept of social change, and you think kind of speed and sustainability, like you can reform or kind of revolutionize or turn over institutions, but sustainability is an issue as well. How do you make change that is sustainable and can kind of keep the energy, whatever the resources and the communities that it's like. Somebody else is there.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was posed at the beginning, which is how to get more Peace Corps volunteers into the city, into Baltimore, into where they can make a change. And I think the biggest thing that draws all Peace Corps volunteers is the desire to make a difference, to be able to do something. And sort of to blend a couple things that, one, we see in front of us people that are making a difference. And two, I'm born and raised in Baltimore, and there's an incredible history and versatility and diversity within Baltimore. The art scene is, I'm not an artist, I'm a mathematician, but my mother's an artist. I think the art scene in Baltimore is incredible. I think the history behind Baltimore and its importance in the United States is incredibly important. But I also see that Baltimore is not a huge megalopolis, it's a small town, and it's called Smallmore. Everyone, I mean, it's, you know everyone. If you live in Baltimore long enough, you know everyone. And it's, I feel Baltimore's at a crossroads in which Peace Corps volunteers, returned Peace Corps volunteers, can make a difference. We can do something. And if we open up that opportunity within the city government or through things like the Peace Worker program, you'll get Peace Corps volunteers coming here. Because if we know we can make a difference that can help a lot of people, Peace Corps volunteers, that's what drives us.
Jody?
I was just going to say, picking up on that, Baltimore is about neighborhoods, and returning volunteers are about neighborhoods, and about communities, and about villages. And when we read applicants from Peace Corps that come to UMB, it's about, I want to come to Baltimore because it's about neighborhoods. I like the closeness of the neighborhoods. And for me, part of it is to keep reinforcing the neighborhoods. When I was here before in Charles Village, I'm really dating myself, Mayor Shriver was mayor. D'Alessandro was just leaving. And there was, and I'm sure that a lot of you are aware of it, the Baltimore City Neighborhood Fair. Well, one of the elements about the Baltimore City Neighborhood Fair, and I was president of the Charles Village Civic Association, so, and it comes right back to your point, I got to meet the heads of the neighborhoods all over the city, and there was a sense in this fair of all the neighborhoods being equal. We all had exactly the same amount of space. And we could carve that space any way we wanted to communicate to the rest of the city who we were as a neighborhood identity. And we would all walk around and we would all learn. But then we could be a city. And that's what I really appreciated, that I loved being part of the city because I was one of the equal building blocks of neighborhoods that made a city. And I think one of the gifts that we need to take advantage of is the small groups of neighborhoods, the volunteerism, the being there for each other, that add up to a city that collectively we can be proud of.
Yeah. Then we've got a question. Go ahead.
Here's where you're going to ask me to leave. When you say Baltimore, you think East Baltimore. You think everything from Martin Luther King to Camden. When I say Baltimore, I think of West Baltimore. West Baltimore, the highway displaced 19,000 people. Fractured intentionally a community that exists today. Those communities aren't whole. Those communities don't talk. They've lost the language of community and communal and self-resources. So I get upset when people talk about Baltimore because I know they're not talking about West Baltimore. And then, like I said, I mentioned before, there's only 2 dots on West Baltimore. When you think of the city, focusing on an institution like the city, that's a perfectly wonderful place to go and to do change, because policy has to change. One of the things that we're doing in June 2011, the 22nd to the 26th, we will have 50,000 people in West Baltimore. We are raising $1.29 million for a festival around culture, around resilient communities. We are challenging the city of Baltimore and the residents of Baltimore to think about who we are. We remember, and they remember, the residents remember in West Baltimore when we were a city of neighbors, neighborhoods, when we used to wash steps, and the mayor used to, limousine used to come around and give you flowers for your community service. when I think of service in the field, it's the third world of West Baltimore. It's ground root. It's full of stories. That's what got me started, was at a community meeting listening to some old lady cry her heart out because in the middle of a community thing about rats and crime and grime, she starts talking about the highway and the loss. So that's what changed me. So it's intentional change, and where is intentional change needed? It's needed all over. All over. There isn't a spot we can't change or need to change.
Well, you can jump in and then maybe.
Thanks, Jody. I really want to thank you for assembling all these practical idealists today. It's really a great group of people.
Quick interject, a quick shameless plug. Is anybody here tonight who's prospective thinking about Peace Corps? Okay, so we can. And we've got Jessica's here, right? We got a recruiter in the house. And we got about 50 folks that converge on you. So catch people at all stages of that. Thanks, William. Yeah, I think just in general, like proliferating opportunities for people to get engaged locally, abroad, to have these are the kind of, I mean, service for me is in many ways it's a being there experience. Like it's a way to be somewhere where you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to be, and when you're there, you hear the stories, you understand the complexity of these spaces, you see resources where you thought there were just deficits, right? And that can happen right through local or international or national kind of service. So I hope we'll keep growing these opportunities, and that'd be something to advocate for. Megan, and then we'll go behind that.
Yeah, well, one thing that just keeps coming up in my mind through a lot of these comments is thinking about, I grew up in Baltimore City in Violetville, just down here off Wilkins Avenue. And, you know, I was watching The Wire, and I was thinking that you could do Peace Corps in Baltimore. I mean, it's not about an international experience, it's about this contact with the other. And last week, I just think about how divided our city is, and how it's like sort of the old-time cars in Hershey Park, where it kind of looks like two tracks that are kind of going around the same place, but really, it looks like one, but it's really two tracks, and you're not really intersecting. You're going over and under, and you're all running around the same city, but there's not a lot of interaction. I think about that a lot in terms of race and class. And last year, I lived on 27th and Calvert, which was a block from... Really? 2623. And I was a block from where the Hopkins researcher was murdered, which got a lot of press, even though a couple of African-American people in my neighborhood were killed and got no press, which is different, but it's tangent. Anyway, I was thinking about how the people who killed this man lived 3 blocks from him, but somehow they didn't see themselves as part of the same neighborhood. So when I think about my vision of social change for the city, and what Boudin could do, or what we all could do, whether you're interested in Peace Corps or not, or you think in that kind of way, is go out there, get involved, you know, do Peace Corps in Baltimore City. Go, you know, I think a lot too about that, the Machiavelli man and working within your sphere of influence. And like you were saying about not moving this mountain, it's like you touch what you can touch and you change what you can change, and at the end of the day, your head hits the pillow and you feel good about it. I think a lot of those things come together and can do it in Baltimore.
Yeah. You bet, yeah.
We were partnered with Alternate Roots, which is a 35-year-old.
Actually, I don't know if people can hear you right in the back.
Sorry. Sorry. We're partnered with Alternate Roots. It's a 35-year-old social change group that functions in the South, using art and culture to re-engage communities about social change. We had the exec committee up last month in West Baltimore at one of the neighborhood centers. So we took a break at 12 o'clock for lunch. These are all white guys, white people in West Baltimore. So we're out on the street, and you hear this bang, 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 bang. A 25-year-old young man was shot in the head, clip emptied at him, around the corner from where we were talking about social change. So in going to the street memorial and coming back from that, the question immediately is, why can't we stop that? Why can't we stop that? And what we realize is you can't stop the bullet, but you're damn well aware of the things that come up to that act. And you're damn well aware of the things that come after that act. So that's what we're focusing on. So I understand that.
If I could just pick up, because you said twice over the cover. I remember that the row house next to ours was a 6-unit, single-room occupancy. And then the 3 of us had the whole house where we moved in. It was a dump, but there it was. Well, this person in the single-room occupancy died. Lived on the first floor. He was fairly young, but he just died one night. And I turned to one of the other neighbors right there, and I said, well, where's the family and the service? I've been back from Peace Corps about 18 months at that point. Well, he doesn't have anyone. And it was that moment of realizing just what you said, that we can be 12 inches apart, which we were in these row houses, and yet we were a life apart. And I remember at that moment thinking, I've got to find out who these people are. I have to find out why this person was by himself and just died by himself. And nothing's going to happen. Somebody will come and take the body away, and that's the end. I need to be that, help that connection so that that community, which was 2 communities on the same street, but we were house by house, 2 separate communities. It was the wake up to say, no, we can't. We have to reach, we have to understand to become one community. That's where I think the difference starts to occur.
Sally, you can jump in.
Yeah, very much building on Megan's point is that I was working internationally. Started in Baltimore in 1988, and I didn't actually start working locally professionally until 1998. So I was doing international work, but what got me into the local work was that I belonged to a synagogue in Reservoir Hill, which is the neighborhood just south of Druid Hill Park. And they recruited me, once I got in, as a member, they recruited me to work with the local community group because I've been in Peace Corps. And you have real skills, real cross-cultural skills. So that divide, the cars, was real. But I felt like I'd been given some skills, as you had, to help get through that. And amazingly, it led, to this complete professional change where I stopped working internationally, started working for a local foundation, and kind of went on from there. So it's this amazing gift that Peace Corps gives you, and they're very, very real and direct ways to utilize it here. But you have to make that step, and you have to reach out. You've got to find some vehicle, some mechanism to work through. It's very hard just on your own to go show up on some city street and say, hey, I'm here to help.
We had someone here, and then Ellis, I think. So, yes, sir. Yeah, that's right. Go ahead.
All right. I was curious. I'm not sure how Peace Corps is funded federally, or federal level. Somebody mentioned how the president's trying to get 18,000 Peace Corps volunteers. Well, in light of the November elections, where Republicans retook the House and narrowly lead the Senate, does a lot of Republicans trying to cut back on discretionary spending, stuff such as even getting rid of, say, Social Security. Does Peace Corps expect any funding cutbacks? And if so, what are they doing to address any funding cutbacks, and how could it affect their operations?
I'll address that real quickly, and then Jody probably could. So the question was, how's Peace Corps in terms of its expansion goal going to navigate change of political administrations? And I would say it was a Kennedy program, but it very quickly had to become a bipartisan program. So it's always, for the 50 years, it's had bipartisan support, but that's challenging in a kind of a moment when you're trying to grow it. It's operating with the largest budget it's ever had, and significant budget increases for the last couple of years, but I'm sure it will be challenging to keep that trend up. I'll just say that there'll be groups going in March from this campus, and later in September to kind of do Days on the Hill and stuff, so I'll make sure we note those things. Jody, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty well summarizes it. It's really the feel-good agency when you go up on the Hill. There's never any pushback. It's just a great place to be, to represent. Coming back to comment, because I think it comes back to the funding issue about, it's really like Peace Corps here, that as we talk about what return volunteers give back to these neighborhoods, I think is in part where the funding can help us as well, because we can actually even talk congressperson by congressperson and senator by senator. This is what we brought back to your district. This is what we brought back to your state. And to not be afraid of exactly what Jody's talking about now and what the Peace Worker program is about and what everyone here is doing in neighborhoods because of what they learned as Peace Corps volunteers. That's part of where the measurement is that I think is going to help keep funding strong.
I'm going to ask, Ellis, you've got a question? I think we're at about 8:30, so we'll take another question or two, and then we'll kind of, I know some people have got to go. We might be able to keep gathered and ask a few more after that. But
I just kind of want to respond to what Megan said earlier. I'm relatively new to Baltimore. I've been here 6 years. I work at Morgan State. I work in community and economic development. I was a Peace Corps volunteer 3 decades ago. But what I found is what Baltimore enjoys presenting as its face as a community of neighborhoods is really wonderful. I find it sometimes challenging though, because regardless to where you are, the next neighborhood you go into, they ask you, where are you from? And trying to work in the
like crossing a
neighborhood.
border.
It is, okay, like trying to work in the neighborhood if you are working with small community groups and they have to have a board of directors and you're trying to help them choose board of directors and you're suggesting people who come from Reservoir Hill or who come from someplace else, they're like, well, they're not from around here. As if their neighborhood is almost like an alien planet, is that no one else can understand what goes on inside this neighborhood except them.
Yeah.
And so how do I break through that? How do I work with neighborhoods in Baltimore, even though I can't be from all 600 of them?
Yeah.
Well, we do challenge groups. I'm speaking more about staffed organizations than pure volunteer organizations. To look outside of their neighborhoods for board members, for employees. Sometimes people think, oh, only a kid who's grown up here can work here. Well, it's not true. It's just like we can go to Senegal or Ghana or whatever and do a decent job. People can come from outside and bring new ideas and new thoughts. So it is a challenge, and there's a little bit of a rigidity, I find, sometimes, to groups that have been in place or have one leader for a long time, that you have to challenge.
How do you cross? Yeah, Ashley.
We have the same problem. How do you talk about art and culture in West Baltimore in that third world country? What we found was that, well, you know this, communities come together during tragedy and they break apart. But we've never come together over something celebratory. And the premise is that doesn't break apart. So the festival is smoke and mirrors in a lot of ways, and the biggest damn carrot in the world. And what we found was it requires communities to learn how to communicate. What you're talking about is what I call the old colonial Baltimore, the old Jim Crow Baltimore, especially in West Baltimore, where you had to defend yourself. It was a turf sort of kind of thing. That community held that community together. And they sort of, I guess it's the flight, kill it, eat it, bake it kind of syndrome that we react to. So what we're saying is, if you infuse a different path of relationships by something glittery and beautiful, that you'll get communities to start talking to each other. So the festival is that carrot, is that mirror. And the conversation is totally different when they realize that you're a neighbor, that you're family. And the conversation turns really positive. And by the time we come out of this festival, we will have a united West Baltimore. And that's a powerful thing.
Are you going to need any hands in organizing that?
Right now, it's just me. That's a system for failure.
And I'm wondering if the Gwynn Falls Trail project, if this is if this rings true there, how you have This is a different kind of space, but it must have been both a challenge and an opportunity to try to connect this strand of greenways that cuts through many communities.
It does. It connects presumably 17 communities in West Baltimore, but along with Megan's comment, these are all the way from Windsor Hills and Otterbein Federal Hill to Rosemont and Mill Hill and other neighborhoods in between. And I honestly don't think yet that the vision of that trail connecting neighborhoods has really happened as people had hoped it would. I did want to say on Ashley's point about a celebration, I think we sometimes forget some of the battles of the past that brought people together. When I first moved to Baltimore, the Fells Point Fun Festival was bringing 50,000 people to a neighborhood that you all know as a gentrified neighborhood, but at that time was a threatened neighborhood that had just fought an expressway battle, was really unknown to many people, was threatening to many people. And one strategy they used to try to make people more aware of the value of that community was to stage a fun festival. That thing is now 50 years old. That is going on and on. I'm not saying you're going to bring gentrification to West Baltimore,
it's going
which
to
isn't
happen.
the goal. No, but I think these struggles do give rise to public celebration, and that could be a valuable tool.
Maybe a last question, yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, because currently I'm a social work intern, and we have all these great resources in the city, but no one ever takes advantage of them. How would you propose that we actually get the people to have change themselves and take advantage of these resources?
Connecting people's resources. Jody, are you going to speak to the School of Social Work yet? This is a challenge to bring systems
I
and
was
people
just,
to navigate.
when you're asking the question, I sort of go back to the Peace Corps methodology of how you find an informal leader among the group that you want to introduce to the resources, and that you work through an informal leader in how that person actually becomes the change agent, because you, at whatever intern or outsider role that any of us play, it has to come from within. But you find the 2 or 3 or 4 people that can see what the advantage is of the resource, and then you do the subtle working process that they're the ones that bring others to that particular resource.
I think you also spend some real time finding out why they don't want to take advantage of it. Sometimes there are unintended side effects, or there's a meaning to that may not be immediately obvious. So it's kind of getting inside. It's a cultural approach.
Rich, with health services, go ahead.
Yeah, no, primary adult care, I was talking about with Ian actually before we started, getting the key stakeholders in the community, the hospitals, for instance, in this particular case, obviously healthcare, to promote it. I mean, there's funding streams available, something new comes up, you have to get small community organizations, and in this particular case, it was someone from a hospital who came out to Beans and Bread, for instance, every Thursday afternoon, and then us as nursing students engaging the 20 or so folks, and then the people that walked into the community actually to say, hey, this resource is available for primary adult care for 18 to 65 unaffiliated men who didn't have any health care before. So it's finding those organizations that can disseminate, like everyone's been saying.
On the other end, I'm remembering, I think it was you, Rich, and maybe Jason, one of our reflection sessions actually on service, we did a homeless simulation activity where you kind of had, you had to go around to the station to navigate. And I think the alternative of spring breaks are now doing that here on campus as well, where really trying to create as part of the service experience, a reflection experience, a real understanding and empathy for what it's like to be someone who's has to access those services to live or to be healthy. And it's a lot more, it's complicated, it's risky, it's and it's intimidating. There's a lot of components to it. So I think, also those kind of activities in terms of really understanding that lifestyle. So actually,
we found that it's a simple thing. In West Baltimore, they don't respond to anything if they don't know you. If they don't know you, they distrust what you are selling, whether they need it or not, because they've been sold that carrot before, and like I said, nothing changes. So what we have tried to do for our betterment and understanding is that they are people, and so are you. So that's the first thing you have to do, is establish your personal relationship with the communities. The other thing we found was that the community is not necessarily represented by community groups, that there is a level under that among people. I think you referred to it, we call them angels. There are people in communities that keep them together. They're not necessarily organized. They decide to do the personal civic action. They decide to come out of their house and organize their community. You need to find them. And they're hidden. Everything in that community is hidden because that's where everything is protected. That's the soul of that community. You need to get down to it.
Maybe I'll ask the question.
I'm in my first year of organizing for my internship, and I'm definitely developing a passion for it. And but some of the residents don't really value organizing, and I just wanted to know, how important do you think it is to have organizers in community to empower residents to produce change in their community? And then what skills and attributes do you think are important for an organizer to have to get residents to advocate for themselves and produce that social change that they need in their community?
Yes, that's all.
Community organizers?
Well, there's a lot of layers to the question, and I'm suddenly now organizing a course on that topic. But it's really what is organizing and organizing for what, and part of it is what is in the interest and what is the interest. And I think it comes back to one of the other questions too, is that if you're having a hard time making it, if you've got sick kids, or you're waiting for the once a month small check to come in, or a whole host of other things, you don't often have the time resources to really do the organizing or be part of an organizing effort. And so you almost have to break it up into its own pieces, is to be asking the questions behind the questions behind the questions as to why a person is not getting out and organizing. What are the needs? What are the immediate needs that are the steps before wanting to organize? So it's complicated, but it gets broken into its components before you look at a larger organizing effort. Yeah, and I think what maybe Ashley said, this idea of organizing around positive as opposed to negative. I went to a multitude of community meetings in Reservoir Hill where we talked about crime, rats, trash. And that after a certain amount of time, that's going to weed out a lot of people. They're not going to keep coming. But when you have a community grieving organizer, which Reservoir Hill currently has, and you're out at a harvest festival and planting trees, it doesn't mean you never talk about the rats, but you have another perspective that's pulling people in before they get to talk about the problems. You've got something really positive to do. That may bring some folks in that right now don't want to connect.
Jason, did you have something you wanted to
just to follow up on that. I think another thing when you're thinking about communities is, especially if this is your first time going at it, you want to look a little bit at the history of what's been organized before in the neighborhood, because a lot of times, I think we've talked about this a little bit, a lot of times organizations with good intentions and great hearts go into the community. And it's like, I'm in Southwest Baltimore, and our population's been over-surveyed, and groups come through, and with great intentions, but sometimes, as we know, things fall apart, and you can only go out and organize so many times, and someone's coming to your door, and I've seen that, I've heard that, but they've said this, whether it's rats, trash, crime and grime, anything. So that's one thing to keep in consideration, and also partner with folks in the community. It's because I know that Baltimore is broken up into neighborhoods, and I think it goes back to Peace Corps experience and things. I think the first time you go out, there can certainly be challenges, but just because you're not part of the community doesn't mean you can't become part of the community. It's just going to take a little bit of time, right? And a lot of time, if you get somebody within the neighborhood, like for myself, with Paul's place. I mean, a lot of people forget my name, but they think of me as Paul because they think the organization's been there for a long time. You know, it's got, the organization's got some credibility there. And also, but a lot of that has to do with when I first was there 5 years ago, you know, getting teamed up with people in the community, because that can start to, you know, break down a little bit of the barrier. So I think it's kind of a twofold. I mean, obviously it's more than just twofold, but I'd always just concentrate on what has been done before, so you're not seen as replicating something that may have gone wrong in the past. And then also try to team yourself up with somebody in the community, because a lot of times there's a lot of community leaders, community characters that really, you know, have their finger on the pulse of the community.
Well, listening.
And don't have their fingers on the pulse.
That's true.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time. But what I've had to do recently is ask myself important questions. Who's it for? Why am I doing this? Is it for me? Do I think they need this? How far am I willing to go with this? Because the ultimate goal of community organizing is to set people free, is to invest people in leadership skills. So how far are you willing to go with that? So unless you can answer those things for yourself, but they read you in 30 seconds about your motives and what you're capable of. So you need to be able to know that about yourself. I've asked that too late in my life, but it's at some point you have to, if you're going to enter in the community, you got to answer those kinds of things for yourself. It takes time.
Okay, I think, any final comments or thoughts? I would say just, I mean, I think in general, a theme of the whole conversation, which is really ongoing, it's not, we're not wrapping this, is I think, you know, there's plenty of opportunities to get engaged, right? Locally, internationally, and that experience of being engaged isn't isolated, right? It leads to other opportunities to be engaged if you know, coming home from abroad or whatever. But there's plenty of opportunities right here. You know, if people are interested in making these connections, or through our other service learning programs and things. But we live in a region where there's plenty of need, but the issues are complicated, and the people themselves are need. These are complicated issues to understand, but you got to be there, kind of, I guess, first to start getting that. Sally and Ed and Rich, Jody, Ashley, I really want to thank you for coming out and staying and standing the whole time. We punished the challenge, but I thank you, and thank everyone for coming out. I don't. The food table looks fairly empty. Sorry about that. Pick whatever crumbs are left. We do have Peace Corps materials. We have copies of Sarge, which really are takeaways for anyone that would like one. It takes a big stocking to stuff that book, but please don't make me carry them back to my office. Please take a copy of Sarge if you don't have one. Anything else? Thank you.